Dipama, Chapter 5, Seeing Through Our Stories. Quote, "Let go of thinking, and your faith will come from within." Dipama taught that the mind is all stories, one after another, like nesting dolls. You open one and another is inside. Open that one and there is another story emerging. Once you get to the last nesting doll, the smallest one, and open it, inside of it is what? It's empty, nothing there. And all around you are the empty shells of the stories of your life. Because Dipama was able literally to see through the stories of the mind, she did not acknowledge personal dramas of any kind. She wanted her students to live from a deeper truth than their interpretations of and identification with the external events of their lives. Dipama knew all about life's dramas. She had personally suffered chronic illness, grief at the deaths of her parents, husband, and 2 children, and crushing despair. Only when she had gone beyond identification with the stories and dramas in her life did she begin to live as a free person. No Problem, by Deepak Chaudhuri. Quote, "Sometimes when someone would come to her with their troubles, she would laugh and laugh. She couldn't stop laughing. Finally, she would say, 'This problem you are facing is no problem at all. It is because you think this is mine. It is because you think there is something for me to solve. Don't think this way, and there will be no trouble.'" End quote. Don't Think They Are Bowing to You, by Rishi Barua, Dipama's grandson. Quote, "When I was 8 years old, I ordained as a monk in Bodh Gaya at her suggestion. I was a monk for 3 days. Immediately after I ordained, people began to bow to me. I thought, oh wow, I felt very special. But my grandmother cautioned me. Don't think they are bowing to you, they are bowing to your garments only." End quote. Not Special, by Matthew Daniel. Quote, "We were in the back seat of a car in Calcutta one afternoon, going to visit Munindra. Dipama was sitting next to me and holding my hand. Through her hand, I could feel this incredible tingly warmth of love in my body. I was basking in it. It was for maybe a minute or 2, and as I was delighting in it, my mind jumped in with, 'Oh, you're special.' The moment I had this thought, she immediately but very gently let go of my hand, and she didn't touch it again for the rest of the trip." End quote. What Is Your Intention? By Ajahn Thanasanti. Quote, "One night a student showed up who began asking Dipama a lot of questions. He was quite challenging and confrontational, and coming from an abstract intellectual place and trying to get her to argue. At one point, she stopped and said in a very calm voice, 'Why have you come here? What is your intention?' The sincerity of her question immediately silenced him." Unraveling, by Jack Engler. Quote, "Having just arrived in India, I wanted to see Dipama right away. Jack, Joseph, and Sharon had said, 'Just go.' So I went that evening at the first opportunity. I had her address, but I don't know how I found my way there. It was already getting dark by the time I arrived. I remember getting out of the taxi in this poor section of the city, and looking down this dark, dank alley with rubbish in it, and thinking, I can't believe this is the right place. It was. I pushed down the alley and came to a flight of open stairs on the right. I'd been told the 4th floor, but it was so hard to see, and I was getting more and more anxious, and I think I missed her floor the first time. I finally came out on the 4th floor balcony and said her name to the first person I met. They pointed around the balcony to the other side of the open courtyard. By this time it must have been 6 or 7 o'clock. Her students had gone for the day, and this was undoubtedly family and personal time. I have to admit, with some embarrassment, that I didn't think of this then. I had just finished 4 months of intensive practice. I had come all the way to study the Dharma, and I think I was more than a little self-preoccupied. I saw a diminutive woman standing outside the door and said something, and she motioned for me to wait. She got her daughter, Deepa, to translate. I introduced myself and explained that I was a Dharma student and a friend of Joseph Goldstein and Sharon Salzberg. She invited me into their small room. I remember sitting on Ma's wooden bed and starting to explain why I was there, and telling her about all the intensive practice I had just done and what I'd experienced. She couldn't have been kinder or more welcoming. She listened patiently and attentively as Deepa translated, as though she had nothing better to do at that moment than listen to this young man who had just intruded into her home and was full of his experiences. As I continued to talk, something in me started to unravel. It's never happened to me before or since like it did that evening. I've certainly been anxious meeting people before. I've met many other people of note in various walks of life over the years, but nothing like this. The more I talked, the more a tide of panic and confusion rose up and overwhelmed me. My mind started spinning wildly out of control. I think I must have started making no sense whatsoever. I felt completely and utterly abashed. All my grandiosity, all my self-importance, all my experiences, all my sense of specialness and being on this extraordinary spiritual pilgrimage just came crashing down around my ears in a matter of minutes. And Ma hadn't done anything other than sit there and hold me gently in her gaze and her attention. End quote. Everything is Impermanent, by Sudipti Barua. Quote, when my son died in 1984, Dipa Ma shocked me with her words. It was a hard teaching I have not forgotten. Today your son is gone from this world. Why are you shocked? Everything is impermanent. Your life is impermanent. Your husband is impermanent. Your son is impermanent. Your daughter is impermanent. Your money is impermanent. Your building is impermanent. Everything is impermanent. There is nothing that is permanent. When you are alive, you might think, this is my daughter, this is my husband, this is my property, this is my building, this car belongs to me. But when you are dead, nothing is yours. Sudipti, you think you are a serious meditator, but you must really learn that everything is impermanent. End quote. Without the Worry, by Sylvia Boorstein. Quote, everything that I feared most, losing my husband, losing my children, had happened to Dipa Ma, and yet here she was, tranquil and equanimous and cheerful. To see her with the same causes for concern as I had, but without the worry, was inspirational. End quote. Letting Go, by Stephen Schwartz. Quote, a number of Americans, concerned about the poor conditions in Dipa Ma's neighborhood, collected donations to help her move away from the inner city. One student recalled what happened when he delivered the money to build the new house. Quote, altogether, I had about $2,500 for this house fund, which I figured in Indian money was enough to build half of a house. It was more than Dipa Ma's family had to live on for a year. Because I loved her so much, and probably also because I was feeling some self-importance, I took the responsibility for delivering this money quite seriously, but also with a lot of delight. Wait until she sees what I'm bringing her, I thought, one half of a house. When I got there, I told her I had brought some money in American dollars. She said, we can't change American dollars. We are not even allowed to have dollars. You should convert them into rupees. The exchange rate being what it was at the time, $2,500 was worth about 40,000 rupees. I went to the American Express Bank, and the largest denomination they had was a 100-rupee note. I walked out of the place with my backpack stuffed full of rupees. I had been ripped off twice in India, once for $1,000, so I was nervous carrying this sum of money in cash through the streets of Calcutta. I felt like I was carrying Dipa Ma's future on my back, her house, her entire worldly fortune, and her chance for a life of comfort. I went straight from the bank to her apartment. It took about an hour to travel there, and every step of the way I was in a state of high anxiety. But I couldn't wait to see her face. We thought it would take 5 years to raise the money, and here, within the first 3 months, I was to deliver half the house to her. She will be so happy, I thought. By the time I got to the apartment, I was literally sweating. As I walked in the door, Dipa Ma put her hands on my head and gave me her usual blessing. "You look quite distraught," she said. I didn't want to say, "Well, I'm basically afraid of the people in your country. I thought I'd be ripped off." Instead, I just said, "Well, I had to go change the money. It was really quite a lot of money, and I was concerned about having so much cash on me." I took off my pack, opened it, and emptied it out onto the floor. The place suddenly looked like a scene in a movie, with piles and piles of rupees all over the apartment. Dipa Ma didn't blink an eye. She didn't even move or offer any expression of enthusiasm or excitement. She just took the money, slid it under her bed, and covered it up with a piece of cloth. I thought, under the bed? 45,000 rupees? You don't want to stash that sum of money under your bed. Let's put the money someplace where it won't get stolen. And what about your new house? Let's talk about your house. She said nothing about the money or the house. Instead, she was only concerned about me. She said, "You should quiet down. Don't be nervous." Then she turned to Dipa and said, "We need to feed him." On my way out, I thought I'd maybe better mention the money to Dipa. "Your mother put all this money under the bed," I said. "I'm concerned it might not be safe. You should take it to the bank." Dipa laughed. "Oh, it would not be safe in the bank, but it will be safe here." I started to protest, but then I realized that the problem from the very beginning was me. I was not simply being a vehicle for other people's generosity. I had taken this on as mine. I had turned it into a big deal by infusing my sense of self-importance into the situation. Even after I had turned the money over to them, I hadn't been too willing to let it go. But when Dipa said, "Don't worry, it will be safe," I was finally able to say, "Okay, it's yours." I never asked another question or had a second thought about the money or the house. When I walked out of their apartment, I felt free of that burden. In fact, I never even learned whether they actually built the house. And this is the first time I've thought about it in almost 20 years. End quote. Why Be Upset? By Dipa Barua. Quote, "When she stood up against something she felt was wrong, sometimes others would blame and criticize her. But she was not bothered by this. She told me, why be upset? Even the Buddha had to bear slanders and criticism throughout his life. And I am just an ordinary and insignificant woman." End quote. The Dharma is Very Special by Joseph Goldstein. Quote, His Holiness the 16th Karmapa, the head of one of the great lineages of Tibetan Buddhism, visited IMS one year when Dipa Ma was teaching there. All the yogis and teachers were going up to him for blessings, and he would tap them on the head with a ritual object. When Dipa Ma went up to him, he took her head between both his hands and spoke softly with her. It was clear that there was some recognition going on between them, even though they had never met before. In the tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, there was an elaborate preparation for the Karmapa's visit. A teaching throne was built and covered with a beautiful brocade. Some people were wondering about all these preparations, which were in stark contrast to Dipa Ma's utter simplicity. When they asked her about it, she said, "Oh, he does that so that people will see the Dharma as being very special." End quote, and end of chapter 5.